This is a response to a couple of videos I saw on YouTube. One of them called Ben Shapiro Stomps Neil deGrasse Tyson. The other one, Ben Shapiro Mops the Floor with Neil deGrasse Tyson. So in this video title, I tried to up the ante. I had every intention of disagreeing with everything that Ben Shapiro said, but I couldn't do it. There's a couple things that I actually agree with him on, and hopefully that won't make anybody upset.
How dare you! How dare you! You should be ashamed of yourself!
There goes half my viewing audience. Now in this first one, Ben's going to reply to a tweet by Neil, and he's going to begin by spitting. He's going to say, Neil deGrasse Tyson, pooey!
Neil deGrasse Tyson tweeted something out this morning that was particularly insipid and insane. He tweeted out, quote, in 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew from New York to Paris. 45 years later, in 1972, we last walked on the moon. 45 years later, in 2017, we, meaning like we haven't done anything in 45 years. Okay, 45 years later, we actually have a fully manned space station. Like, there are always people living in space, always. We have probes on Mars. We sent a spacecraft to an asteroid. It landed on an asteroid. It's a pretty amazing thing.
Not a good tweet by Neil. I think Ben nails him pretty good. Mars rover was pretty amazing. Now the tweet is specific towards space exploration. Ben replies with specific examples of accomplishments that have been made regarding space exploration, but then he kind of expands it to insinuate that Neil doesn't recognize any progress anywhere that's been made over the last 45 years and starts rattling off great examples of progress that have been made.
Right, life expectancy has increased dramatically over the last 45 years. In 1972, life expectancy in the United States was 71 years old. Today, it's nearly 80. That's almost a decade of increase in the last 45 years in life expectancy. Infant mortality in the early 70s was at about 20 deaths per 1,000 live births, which is crazy high, right? I mean, that means that 2 out of every 100 live births, the kid would die. Today, infant mortality is at 6 per 1,000 live births. We've sliced it by 2/3. The global extreme poverty rate has been sliced in half. According to the World Bank, the number of people living in extreme global poverty fell under 10% for the first time in 2015. So less than 1 in 10 people around the world are living in what they call extreme global poverty. That's a reduction of 75% in extreme global poverty in the last 25 years. Pollution has plummeted for all the people on the left who are deeply worried about the environment. Pollution has plummeted by 36%. Sorry, the American population grew 36% between 1970 and 2000. Energy consumption increased 45%. Air pollutants decreased 30%, 29%. That includes a 98% drop in lead emissions. Even in poor countries, even in devastatingly poor countries, the vast majority of people have cell phones. Even in poor countries, penetration rates of cell phone subscriptions are unbelievable. 9 in 10, right? There's 9 subscriptions per 10 inhabitants. 9 cell phone, really, this is true. You talk about global poverty being alleviated. There are 9 cell phone subscriptions for every 10 inhabitants in poor countries as of 2014.
That 9 out of 10 people in poor countries having cell phones didn't sound right to me, so I did my own research. I Googled it basically, and what I found was statistics saying 63% of the world's population has cell phones, meaning 4 out of 10 don't. And if you're talking about poor countries, obviously it's going to be more than that. So I got to call nonsense on that 9 out of 10. But here's something to think about. 60% of the world's population doesn't have access to a running toilet. So the next time you flip the lever, be thankful.
Yeah, it's just the tip of the iceberg. You're living in the greatest country on the face of the planet in the best time to live in the history of humanity. And yet Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't understand what progress looks like, because the reality is that we are stuck in this system. Human beings are just stuck in the system where we're always looking at all of the things we think are bad in the universe, when the reality is that things are pretty good.
So basically what Ben is saying is,
Always look on the right side of life.
so that was the first video, and now I'm going to critique a video by Ben Shapiro where he criticizes a video by Neil Tyson.
Here's Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about the most important video he has ever done.
How did America rise up from a backwoods country to be one of the greatest nations the world has ever known. We pioneered industries, and all of this required the greatest innovations in science and technology in the world. And so science is a fundamental part of the country that we are.
Pause it there for 1 second. So here's what is interesting about what he's saying here. Number one, science does not define whether a nation is good or bad. Okay, Nazi Germany was actually pretty scientifically literate until they started banning Jews for Jewish science. They developed the V-2 rocket. They developed all sorts of, they had several Nobel Prize winners, people who actually couldn't accept the Nobel Prize in science because the Germans didn't want them to. Science does not mean morality. But it is important to note one of the reasons that the United States has always been so scientifically advanced is because the United States was always a limited government place that didn't seek to suck resources out of the pocket of private industry and redistribute it. Redistributive nations have trouble with scientific patents. The United States does not. We've always been the world leader, or at least for the last century and a half, we've been the world leader in scientific patents. And that's also because there's a spirit of freedom that exists in the United States that does not exist in big government places elsewhere. DeGrasse Tyson won't talk about why it is that the United States is so scientifically advanced. He just sort of assumes it. He sort of assumes we're really scientifically advanced, but then he doesn't discuss why that is because he's a big government guy who thinks there should be more social redistributionism, ignoring the fact that it is the lack of social redistributionism, it is the fact that there's a huge amount of private industry in the United States that has helped push science forward. He continues.
Not sure why Ben went into social distribution, but he begins by saying science doesn't make a country moral and talks about the Nazis, how they were scientifically advanced. Then, of course, he had the persecution by the Jews. Now, I agree that science is not everything. And this is an issue I've had with Neil deGrasse Tyson in the past and other scientists where they disparage the study of philosophy, which is critical. Science can't exist without philosophy. When you look at the Nazis and the Jews, you didn't have secularism. Secularism means no persecution and no special privileges based on religious belief. Persecuting Jews, not allowing to have them, not allowing them to be professors, not allowing them to own businesses, all these horrible things that the Nazis did was the opposite of what secularism did. And obviously, when you look at our country, there's many factors that go into this aside from science. A lot of things that are philosophy. We the people, beginning our Constitution's philosophy. Freedom of speech is philosophy. Freedom of religion, where the government doesn't dictate how you pray or what you pray to. These things are philosophy. And having that foundation is necessary in order to really promote good science, and not just science, as Ben Shapiro said, but directed in helping mankind, not directed in being something that's destructive.
But in this, the 21st century, when it comes time to make decisions about science, it seems to me people have lost the ability to judge what is true and what is not. What is reliable, what is not reliable. What should you believe, what should you not believe? And when you have people who don't know much about science standing in denial of it and rising to power, that is a recipe for the complete dismantling of our informed democracy.
Let us demand that educators around America teach evolution not as fact, but as theory.
An increasing number of parents showing skepticism about vaccinations.
Voters have approved a ban on GMOs.
Critics call climate change unproven science.
Pause there for a second. Okay, so here is the problem with some of what he is saying here. So I agree that there are a lot of people who don't know what is true and what is not. I've spoken about this in a political sense. I speak about this with regard to facts all the time. You notice that he never talks about science that the left doesn't like, right? So he never talks about the science of abortion, right? He never talks about the science of child development. He never talks about the science regarding transgenderism. I mean, people who literally have the fantasy that people with chromosomes that say X and Y and are fully male can be female if we just give them hormone treatments and a few breast implants, right? He never talks about that. He always talks about climate change or evolution. But here is part of the problem. Neil deGrasse Tyson, just like a lot of people who's expert in his field, and I know there are people who have questioned his expertise, but he knows more science than I do, so he's more expert than I am, so I'm not going to go into that. But I will say this. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a guy who has posited that there ought to be a country called Rationalia, where people who agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson get to vote on rational bases alone. What he's really calling for here is a scientific oligarchy. He's not calling for a democracy.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is a science fascist who wants our country run by an army of Sheldon Coopers.
He's not worried about an informed democracy. He wants to be able to cram down his point of view on everybody else. So take, for example, what Pence is saying here. Now, What Pence is saying here is that it's not forbidden for creationism to be taught in local schools. We shouldn't be saying that evolution is the only way to think about things. Godless evolution is the only way to think about things. I may disagree with Mike Pence. In fact, when it comes to the teaching of science and the teaching of creationism, I don't think they're incompatible, but I also am not sure that creationism should be taught in science class because I don't think it's a scientifically provable hypothesis. That being said, it is not my job to say to the American people that you on a local level cannot vote for how to raise your children. Neil deGrasse Tyson thinks that he should be able to tell you what your kids should learn and not learn. He's not worried about an informed democracy. Again, when Mike Pence says, let us demand that educators around America teach evolution not as fact but as theory, what he's really saying is, let's stop using the federal government to cram down our version of what we think is true on local communities.
What a complete load of crap. What Mike Pence said when he went on the floor of Congress was that he doesn't know what a scientific theory is, and he's so damn arrogant, he didn't bother to find out. When you are a member of Congress, you have resources at your disposal. You have access to scientists at universities. You can have Neil deGrasse Tyson on your Rolodex, and you have a group of people working for you where you can just tell them to set things up. There's absolutely no excuse for what he did, equating a scientific theory with a guess, with not even a hypothesis. There's no excuse for what he did. He embarrassed himself, he embarrassed the people he represented, and he embarrassed our country because he is too damn arrogant to find out what a scientific theory was. All he had to do was make a call and say, well, creationism is a theory and evolution's a theory, so shouldn't they be taught in science class? And all you have to do is bring that question up to a scientist and they will educate you that when you're not talking about science and you're talking about a theory and talking about it like some guess, that's completely different than what it means as a scientific theory. It is not a hypothesis. And in just having that conversation, he could have kept himself from embarrassing himself and embarrassing the entire country. That man has no excuses for what he did. And when Ben Shapiro tries to make excuses for him, he is wrong.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
I may believe in evolution the same way that deGrasse Tyson does. But Pence is not wrong in the sense that it is a scientific theory, just as all theories are scientific theories. This has a lot of evidence to back it. It's a theory that is certainly not evidenceless. But the idea that schools should teach evolution exclusively in science and leave creationism for Bible class, I may agree with it. In a consenting democracy, people get to vote for what they want, and they may be informed about Neil deGrasse Tyson's opinions on evolution, and they can still deny it. Okay, even if they don't like what he's saying, they still have the right to deny it, and they have the right to raise their children as they see fit on this score without reference to Neil deGrasse Tyson's opinions. Again, consent. He may not like it because he thinks that consent actually requires the children not learn, but it's that same consent that allows us to have a free country that allows for all the sorts of economic and scientific development that have occurred over time. Then he continues.
So here Ben's trying to say, Neil's opinion. Neil shouldn't be able to push his opinion on everybody. They should be able to vote on it. This is not a matter of opinion. A scientific theory is not the same thing as a hypothesis. That is no more of a Neil deGrasse Tyson's opinion than a chess grandmaster's opinion that bishops move diagonally. Okay? Not an opinion. If you're playing chess and you take your bishop and you move it 1, 2, and over, you're no longer playing chess. If you're using science and you equate a scientific theory with a hypothesis, you are no longer using science. This is not about Neil deGrasse Tyson's opinion. These are about the established rules of the game. Science is a discipline. It's not a whole bunch of people voting on things that they're pulling out of their ass. Okay? That's not science.
That's not the country I remember growing up in. Not that we didn't have challenges. I'm old enough to remember the 60s and the 70s. We had a hot war and a cold war, the civil rights movement, and all this was going on. But I don't remember any time where people were standing in denial of what science was.
Stop it there for a second. So, number one, that is not true. There have always been people who have stood in denial to what science is. Again, transgenderism and abortion. He never mentions them.
I don't know why Ben's getting upset that Neil didn't bring up transgenderism or abortion in a 4-minute video basically promoting science, but what he says that there's always been bad science, that is true. There is horrible science, stuff that's been established, that was established as science that shouldn't been. Think of the food pyramid that was making everybody fat for how many years. When you look at the amazing Randy and look at his past experience debunking this voodoo crap that was actually real scientists were considering was true. So true, it's not some in the 70s or 60s that we had this wonderful, great focus on science. There's been a lot of scientific crap for a long time.
Science today is stopped. Like, this is science today is what it is. And in the 60s and 70s, you know, we were more respectful of science. I don't think we were more respectful of science in the 60s and 70s. I think that's nonsense. I don't see any evidence to support that whatsoever.
I think Neil is really focused on the space program, which was obviously a wonderful thing, but that's certainly not to say there still wasn't a bunch of science denial going on in the 60s and 70s, just like it's going on today.
That is not accurate. It's just not accurate. And then he gets into his real point, and his real point is to conflate his political views about global warming with scientific evidence about global warming. And this is what the left wants to do here. This is why they call people denialists if they don't agree with their political solutions. So we're going to go through in a second what the science actually says about global warming. According to the IPCC, which is the left source. I mean, this is the source that they like the most. It's also probably the most credible source when it comes to climate science. In any case, here's what he has to say. And you can see him conflating his ideology with scientific fact here.
The things about science is that it is an entire exercise in finding what is true. A hypothesis, you test it. I get a result. A rival of mine double checks it because they think I might be wrong. They perform an even better experiment than I did, and they find out, hey, this experiment matches. Oh my gosh, we're onto something here. And out of this rises a new emergent truth. It does it better than anything else we have ever come up with as human beings.
Stop it here. The amount of ire in his voice. You know, people who are denying scientific truth. Is there anyone out there who's denying the scientific basis for science? Is there anybody who, like, who's the actual anti-science person?
Well, of course there are. I can't believe he's actually asking that question. There's people that deny the science of evolution. Heck, we've got flat earthers out there now. And certainly people that deny that there's any evidence whatsoever that the earth is warming, which I'm glad to see Ben admits that that is where the scientific consensus is. But just because he's saying it certainly doesn't mean that everything is saying it. Everybody's saying it. So there certainly is a lot of denial going on.
They may disagree with the conclusion that you're drawing. But who's out there going, hypothesis being tested, bad. That's just terrible. But again, this is all designed to kind of raise your emotional needle, raise the emotional temperature, so then when he gets to his climate change point, go, yeah, climate change, that's the thing that's super important, and we should listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson solutions.
This is science. It's not something to toy with. It's not something to say, I choose not to believe equals MC squared. You don't have that option. When you have an established scientific emergent truth, it is true whether or not you believe in it. And the sooner you understand that, the faster we can get on with the political conversations about how to solve the problems that face us.
Let's stop there for 1 second. Okay, so and there's one line there that I do take issue with. He says, this is science. It's not something to toy with. It's not something to say, I choose not to believe in MC squared. You don't, E equals MC squared. You don't have that option. Okay, well, frankly, you do have that option. It just makes you stupid. Right? And this is the case that he should be making. He should be making the case, not that you don't have that option, because that sounds fascistic. You do have that option. He should be making the convincing case as to why the science he is citing is important and true.
Come on, Ben. All he's saying is it's true, whether or not you believe it.
And he should be putting that out there as opposed to just railing against the wind about how there's all these people who don't like science. And here's the thing. Again, he says that, you know, the emergent truths are the most important thing. This is science. It's not something to toy with. You don't get to have an opinion that conflicts with science. Again, half of the left's scientific opinions are false on transgenderism, on abortion. Those are the two most obvious cases. But even with regard to global warming. So let's talk about what the established scientific consensus says. So, it is true. The established scientific consensus says that the Earth is warming. The established scientific consensus also says that human activity has been a large contributor to global warming. There's sort of deviation as to how much of global warming people attribute. Some people say 10%, some people say 30%, some people say 50%. But there's no question that there is some amount of human activity that has had an impact on the warming trend on the globe thanks to the greenhouse gas effect. The question is how large that effect is, and the question is what we are going to do about that.
Perfect. Ben said it is established science. He uses scientific consensus, but basically that there is this warming going on, that part of it is man-made, and there's talk about how much of a percentage that is, but we recognize this is happening. The questions are, well, how rapid is it happening? How much is mankind contributing? And what to do about it? Those things are absolutely correct.
There are lots of solutions that people have proposed. The ones that he proposes are basically vast government regulations, international regulations that aren't going to be particularly effective, that destroy vast swaths of the global economy right now. He wants massive government subsidies for failed green energy projects. He wants massive tariffs and taxes on carbon emissions, right? All of these things may not even be necessary. And again, we have to discuss whether they would do anything. And that's where there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So to pretend that science has now suggested a solution, or that science is very specific about the problem, is just not totally accurate. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. Here is finally what Neil deGrasse Tyson suggests about what his solutions would be on this global warming stuff.
So once you understand that humans are warming the planet, you can then have a political conversation about that. You can say, well, are there carbon credits? Do we do this? Do we put a tariff on it? Do we fund? Do we subsidize? Those have political answers. And every minute one is in denial, you are delaying the political solution that should have been established years ago. As a voter, as a citizen, scientific issues will come before you. And isn't it worth it to say, all right, let me at least become scientifically literate so that I can think about these issues and act intelligently upon them. Recognize what science is and allow it to be what it can and should be in the service of civilization.
And what I love about this is that you see all these beautiful pictures of the American cities from at night over sky. You see the electricity throughout the American cities. What he doesn't say is that his solutions on global warming would likely shut down some of those cities, right? You see some of the electricity go out. It's this idea that the left likes to put out there, that they are just pro-science and you are just anti-science if you disagree with their solutions. That's the problem. I can agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson on evolution. I can agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson that the world is warming and that human activity has something to do with that. I don't have to agree on the solutions that he proposes.
Ben Shapiro is absolutely correct. He's absolutely right. Because the way this video played by Tyson is exactly what he said. Establish science. Science is critical. You got to follow science. And then you must follow this proposed solution, this political solution, this global tariffs, taxes, this regulation, and basically equates the two. So if you believe in the science, if you're scientifically educated, then you are going to understand that we need all these things done. We need this global tariffs, taxes, subsidies, and all this stuff. And that is wrong. That was a mistake. And I think that's a mistake that's been very costly. It's turned a lot of people off. And quite frankly, the constant discussion about global warming that's going on year after year after year, it's pretty much been worthless. I mean, what's been accomplished? And does it have to be a big government solution? Consider this. About a couple decades now, I think a little bit over that, there's something that became available on the shelves in the electronics department. It was called a digital camera. And it wasn't through government regulation, anything like that. No subsidies involved. It was a product for consumers. And because of digital cameras, there's been an enormous amount of waste that we've reduced with film processing. Think about when everybody across the globe would turn film in to have it processed. That involved chemicals, that involved material. And think about how much of that waste has now been alleviated because of digital cameras that, once again, no government regulations, taxes, tariffs, subsidies, anything like that. It was a product that was demanded. The consumers bought it. They weren't forced to. They did it because it had so many advantages. It was a superior way of doing things. It was a superior product to film cameras. Now imagine going into your grocery store right now, and all of a sudden here's a box of frozen burgers called test tube beef. And here's meat that comes from test tubes, comes from a lab. And so there's no animal cruelty. There's no harm to the environment by the cattle business and by factory farms, which produces more emissions than anything. So that product becomes available on the shelf. And heck, I'll be one of the buyers. I'll try something like that. Now, they do have some work left to go to have it the same consistency and taste, but something like that could start a revolution, just like digital cameras did. And it wouldn't be something that the big government would have to get involved with all these tariffs and taxes. And who are the taxes going to hurt, really? You're going to tax people more that fill up their car with gas? Well, there's people that need to go to work. They have to drive. There's no other options. And you're just going to be taxing them. You're going to be taxing the people that have to work in the food industry. They can't work from home. The people that work in the hotel industry, maintain buildings, service buildings, clean buildings, you name it. They cannot work remotely. They have to use transportation. And they might be living so far from a city where they have to work in order to be able to afford to a place to live where they have to drive. And now you're going to raise taxes on them. And once again, as Ben says, it may not be even necessary. And what's the economic impact of doing something like that? So you have to look at other solutions, and not buying onto this big government solution doesn't mean you don't recognize the problem of global warming. It doesn't mean you're anti-science. I'm certainly not. So I have to say, at the end of this, I've got to agree with Ben. It happens sometimes, right? I don't think there's anybody that you would disagree with on every single issue. But anyway, that's the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until next time.
Cisco, do we have to leave all our good friends now? Only until next time, Pancho. Adios, amigos.